midday lunch. So after this, we will have lunch out in the lobby. So if you're hungry, feel free to grab. Oh, score! So if you are hungry, go ahead and grab some food. It'll be delivered about halfway through this session. Also out here, we've got an author, Alice Loy. Go visit her. I'll talk more about her at the end. And then we also have a 12-year-old entrepreneur with his Jack's stands and marketplaces. So go talk to him as well. But to start, we'd like to thank Jim Franklin for coming, for being here for Founder Hour and Denver Startup Week. And thanks to everyone tuning in on YouTube. We are streaming live today, which is so fantastic. Jared back there is our little, wizard behind the curtain. So a big applause to Jared for making this happen every time. So Galvanize is a learning community for technology if you've never been here before. We have courses in software engineering, web development, and data science. So we take people from zero to hero, if you will, and then find them a new job, a new career, and kind of launch their new journey. We also are a co-working space, so we have a space for entrepreneurs or remote workers to come and have a piece of a community. And we have wonderful mentors that come, like Jim. Jim's a mentor at just our Boulder campus.
Yes.
Yes. So we have mentors like Jim that come in and give advice and sit down and chat with all of our coworkers and entrepreneurs. They make time for you guys to ask questions, and that is kind of what separates us from the standard co-working space. So if you have any questions about Galvanize, what we do, who we are, we'll be outside. There's a number of us here today. This is our HQ. This is the original campus. So you can visit us at the front desk or just grab anyone with a Galvanize t-shirt and ask away, ask questions. But let's get started. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So huge fan of Galvanize. I was CEO of SendGrid. We were the first sponsors. This is the first Galvanize campus. So it's great to see how much growth you've had at Galvanize over the years.
Thank you. And thank you for being a part along the whole way. We really appreciate all of the time that you and your wife, Denise, give to the community. So thank you. So when we chatted originally, we sit down before every session and chat on the phone with all of our Founders Live or Founder Hour interviewees. And Jim and I had this discussion, Jim and I and Derek, our producer of the show, we sat down and we said there's a common theme that we want to talk about, and that's kind of this entrepreneurial journey and founder's journey, and what that looks like at the beginning of your career, at the middle of your career, and at the end of your career, and how you go through that path. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And Jim is an expert. He's kind of been through it all. From founding companies to leading companies to mentoring companies and investing in companies. So really, he could just talk about anything all day long, which is great. So I kind of want to kick off the day with, let's start with your company that you founded. In the very late 90s, early 2000s, you just went for it.
Yep. So this is sort of the middle of the story. When you think of what as a founder, I think Reid Hoffman talks about companies have many founding moments, but the sort of legal or technical definition, I'm also a lawyer by training, is you're on the cap table as a founder with founder stock, typically in a Delaware C corporation. So when people think of a founder, that's what they're thinking of. And so I had been sort of in this ecosystem for about 8 years, doing a lot of different things, but had been fired as the VP of sales at a company. And so it's like, now I'm a founder. I had started a business sort of on the side, but I kept my day job because, you got bills to pay and that sort of thing. And so I just really pushed that day job as long as I could. And my co-founders were working down the street. And they're like, hey, man, you need to quit your job. Otherwise, we'll just hire you after we get funded, and you'll get, 1% options and not 25%, founder stock. And so by getting fired, that was really hopeful because I went down the street and I'm like, hey, guys, I'm all in, right? And so I got my 25% founder stock. And we had been talking to VCs. When you talk to VCs in this community, my advice is to talk to them early and often. So don't wait until your deal's like totally ready and polished and good. Do that on the West Coast. On the West Coast, they operate on you get one chance at a first impression. Here, it's early and often. So over the period of 8 years, I've really been working with the VC community in a variety of capacities. But when it's time for my own deal to start moving forward, I would just sit down with these people that I already sort of knew from putting on panels and things and say, hey, me and these guys think we're trying to solve this problem this way. We're concerned about these things. What do you think? Right? It's just that kind of conversation. No deck, no slides, none of that. And they'd be like, well, they say, okay, here's the team, and why are you going that market? Why are you doing it this way? And yeah, those look like problem areas, but don't worry about this one. But you didn't think about this other one over here. And we're like, oh yeah, that's good to think about. And so, back with the founders and be like, oh yeah, what about this? And it just becomes this this ongoing conversation. But we were ultimately able to fund the business really by how I constructed the founding team. So I was again, deeply involved in the startup community through a lot of volunteerism. And I met my co-founder through a sort of an intermediary, just a guy who knew me, knew I was looking for a co-founder. He met an interesting guy who was both a MIT engineer and a Tufts medical doctor. So he was a real doctor and he was a real engineer. And so we had a really unique view of the world. And those are great people to sort of put on a founding team. And he had good access to customers. He was part of HCA, Health Corporation of America, and could get us basically 1 million moms on the HCA platform on our system if we were to build it. And my other co-founder happened to have a brother who sold a company for $1 billion, back when that was a lot of money, still is. But that person became a limited partner in a venture capital fund. And so my co-founder's brother was a great intro to the venture capital fund since he was an investor in that fund. And he had made that fund $400 million when he sold his company. And so that's a great intro, but I had that intro because I had that other co-founder. And so really bringing those two co-founders together, bringing the money together and that customer base, we were able to then raise $5 million from Sequel Ventures and start a company in Lodo and hire 55 people and build a system, and we were out of business in 5 quarters. Oh, wait a minute, I meant we sold the business and it was a win. You know how we talk about those things. It was a win in many dimensions, but it was not a financial win.
So talking about that, we'll touch on the fail, if you will, the quote unquote fail, because there are learning experiences that come out of that. Looking back, hindsight's 2020, what learning experience did you take away from shutting that down, essentially?
So yeah, that was brutal. So my one co-founder, the doctor, he summed it up well. He said, basically, we just proved that if you give away Ford Explorers, people will take them. We built these systems for hospitals. It was that era where you didn't charge the hospital. We gave it to them. We gave them rev share on the back end, and so we could deploy these systems. It was online baby photos in the maternity ward before iPhones and all that stuff and cloud computing. But yeah, so they would take them, and we deployed them. They actually worked. So it was a win, like operationally, and people used it, and moms and dads thought it was great. But yeah, the money part didn't really work. We couldn't get a advertising model, a photo model, any kind of payments. It was really before broadband, and people would sort of look at the pictures but not engage with any of the commerce opportunities. So at any rate, there's a lot of lessons learned there. Having Denise and I talked to a lot of people about what's a good founding team. And I think it's 3 people, but someone strong on product, someone strong on go-to-market, someone strong on finance and operations. And really the 3 of us were none of any of those. And so that's not good. Most of the people that Denise and I meet with are product. 3 founders that have got a thing, and they always want to show us that thing, and we're like, we're not really interested in the thing, right? We're interested in what's innovative about how you're going to go to market, your pricing strategy, your competitive strategy, that type of thing. What's your pricing metric? Or on the finance operations side, what's clever about what you're doing, about how you're going to run the business, how you're going to finance the business. And so having that balanced team. So we had a lot of lessons learned out of that business. Another one's probably, I think in this community, we're all very collaborative. That's the nice thing about doing business in Colorado or doing business Colorado style. But I would argue when you're in that first 10 employees and you're that early 3-person founding team, you might want to be more authoritative. I was part of Oracle for a while, right? And it's a giant organization, but there's one person in charge. That's Larry Ellison. And everyone's super clear about that. And what that gives, your Oracle alumni or consultant. So what it gives you clarity, and it gives you speed, which is really important when you're that big. But when you're small, there's so many decisions to make. It's better to have speed and clarity about what you're going to go do than necessarily having that everyone weigh in. As you're scaling from 25 to and up into that Series B company of hundreds of employees, yes, I think having a collaborative work style, that's all appropriate, the weigh in and the buy-in. But that first 10 people, I think it's more like a military operation. You need to have that platoon leader who's going to be like, we're taking that hill, and then everyone's like, well, let's go take that hill. And if you decide to take this other hill, then you need to turn crisply and take that hill. In our business, in 5 quarters, we had 4 business models. And it was amazing. We were all in the 3rd floor of 15th and Delgany, pretty close to here. That I could walk around that one floor and I'd see like the product team building something that was back on business model 2 when the founding team was already on business model 3. I'd look at our system and say, well, where's the credit card swiper? They're like, we're taking credit cards? I'm like, yes, but that wasn't part of business model 2. I'm like, we didn't know that. And I'm like, so all kinds of lessons. Communication's hard, even when you're in one office on one floor. So in modern businesses, running distributed teams, super hard.
I want to touch really fast on something that you mentioned about diversifying your co-founding team. How do you go about finding your co-founders? Like if you don't know them right away, if you're someone that has an idea and you're looking for those experts to co-found your company, where are you going to find them?
It's trite to say, right? It's networking, right? It's getting out there in the community and letting people know you're looking for co-founders. I was at CU Law School last night talking to law students about their careers, and one of the first-year students there is an engineering grad from CU who's in law school. And I'm like, he asked me, how do I find co-founders? I'm like, you're an engineering person. You're the technical co-founder. You're the hard part of the triangle. He's like, I can't find like business people to help me. I'm like, oh, there's lots of those, right? And everyone's looking for that technical co-founder that can build stuff and not have to pay a G school grad those high salaries that you pay people when they graduate these days, which is good for them, but it's tough to make that early stage money, last a long time. So it's just getting out there in the community, making it known. So how I found my co-founders by being, deeply involved. So by the time the team came together, it had been 8 years, and think of 20 hours a week. So roughly a third-ish of my time, I just spent in the community doing things, and I got to be known, and people got to know me, and then make those connections. And my first co-founder, this guy I commuted with to work on the bus. And we kept a little folder called RBF, Retire by 40, which turned into 50, but still good. We can talk about retirement too, and it's not what you think it is. But it turns out as you're going through this journey, we probably looked at 450 different ideas. So the key thing there is it's not about the idea, it's about the team, right? And how you vet things. It's called the gauntlet. It's how VCs think, what's the market and the opportunity, differentiators and all that stuff. Which I'd be happy to share with you, sort of this little checklist. And then when you get these ideas, we just keep them in a folder, and we talk about them on the bus ride in, and say, no, oh, maybe this one. And we do little quick tests. We'd buy, we want to do something in sort of healthcare IT. We thought maybe we'd do software that would help doctors make more money by categorizing their work optimally for insurance reimbursement. And so we bought donuts, for $20 for some doctor admins, and said, hey, would this system help you, make more money for your practice? And they said, oh yeah, that'd be helpful. And then we said, how much would doctors pay for this? And the admins laughed out loud. I see you're laughing already, right? It's like, doctors don't pay. And we're like, good to know, right? So we spent an hour of our time and $20 to realize, don't design a business where the doctor's writing the check, right? That's a non-starter. But it turns out that co-founder turned out not to be a co-founder because he had twins came along, and he had a job and health insurance and things like that. And he went on to have a very successful career and nice life, but didn't join that team. But it was by being flexible and when the time is right.
So is there a mold that a founder fits into? Is there a singular type of person that is destined to be a founder? Like that's the person you should.
You mean a 22-year-old white guy who drops out of Stanford?
Sure.
No.
Is that the mold that a founder should fit into?
No, that's a loaded question. A lady wrote to me last week. And she said, am I too old to apply for Techstars? And I was just like crushed, like that someone would have that thought in their mind, right? So that, I think probably everyone in this room is on a founder journey of some sort. That's why you're here. And we can kind of talk about this life cycle. We're kind of talk about the middle part, the classic view of a founder, being on the cap table. But there's a lot of ways to be a founder. And this particular lady, had millennial co-founders. And I think that's almost like an ideal situation. When I was at SendGrid, it was basically an all-millennial company, and so I learned a ton from them, and hopefully they learned a few things from me. But it's that nice balance, I think, makes for a strong founding team.
As you're putting your team together, founding your team, how, amongst the co-founders and your areas of expertise, how do you choose which kind of roles to take as the company's growing? Like, you might be the finance person, but you also might be an expert in operations, or you might be kind of that team building expert where you go, I know how to build a really good team. How are you choosing put yourselves in those roles?
So that's one of my very favorite topics. For a number of years, I was the director of Founder Institute here in Colorado, another great organization that helps educate you from being a normal citizen to a founder. We do a whole session on co-founder dynamics. And so it's tricky, right, from splitting equity. The only wrong answer is evenly. From an investor ear perspective, what I hear when you say, hey, we're splitting equity evenly, is you ducked a hard question. You haven't figured out who your platoon leader is. Who's the godfather of this business? In my startup, it was this doctor guy was, really the sort of key person. And so we ended up splitting equity based on cash. How much hard dollar cash are you putting into the business? I'm like, I don't have really any money, so I had to, couldn't put in too much, right? But he was a doctor, right? He had a good cash flow from his night job, doing ER doctoring down at Rose Medical. And the other guy had some cash, but not as much. So we kind of, ended up with 40-25%, even though there were three of us. The other guys had a little more. And then as far as roles, I had such a finance background. I'd been a CFO. It was obvious that I should be the CFO. And the one thing I did not want to be, the CFO, because I'd done that, right? Where's the learning in that? I'm like, I'll do any role other than CFO. And they're like, great, you're the CFO. So I hired a controller, and she was awesome, did all the accounting, made me look good, which is a good rule in life, right? Hire well. People think you're awesome. So she did a lot of that, so I could sort of be a free-floating utility infielder. I like to think of myself as the CERO, C-E-R-O, the Chief Excuse Removal Officer. And so what I would do is not build stuff, and I wouldn't sell stuff, but I took care of everything else. So if you were responsible for building the product, I would make sure your dev environment was up and you had employees to help you and whatever it was you needed. And if it was your job to sell stuff, I would make sure you knew what your goals were and you had your CRM and the pipeline was up and the phones worked and all that stuff, right? And if your spouse had trouble figuring out her health insurance, I would take care of it. So you had no excuses to not deliver the product roadmap, and you had no excuses not to deliver, against the quotas. And so that was sort of a very ambiguous role. My third co-founder ended up being CEO. Primarily, it was helpful in the fundraising. His brother liked that notion that his little brother was the CEO of this web company, and that he backed us as a first angel, which was very, very awesome and helpful. And then he did the intro to the VCs, and the intro to the VCs was like, "Hey guys, why don't you meet meet my brother Ricky, and I'm in, what do you think?" Right? And so that was helpful. But we ran like a partnership, which I think was one of our mistakes, because we never made a decision that all three of us didn't agree on.
One of the things that you keep mentioning as we're talking is this notion of making connections with people. And
can I pause that for a second?
Okay.
The notion of like who is CEO, I give a whole talk with Techstars, other people about this notion of a CEO is not the holy grail. So if you're a co-founder and you're arguing about who the CEO is, you're thinking about this, you're not thinking about it right. So I like to just stack rank real quickly. Like the best thing you can be is a co-founder. The second best thing you can be is a founder, right? And then way down the list from there is being a CEO. And there's some good things about being a CEO, and there's some really, really bad things about being a CEO. Like it's very, very lonely, and you don't perceive that when you're like, oh, I want to be a CEO. But that's a whole nother talk. But the thing is that being a co-founder is the best thing, because you're the designer of the business. Think if you're building a Jack Stands type business on the corner, right? If you're the co-founder, you decide which corner, what's your naming and branding, what's your product strategy, what's your pricing, all that fun stuff. What does the CEO of a corner store do, right? They've got to hire people, make sure they show up in the morning, open the drapes, what they do at the end of the night, balance the cash, take the deposits in, clean it up, and then what do they do the next day? Same stuff, right? Is that fun? It's like, kind of fun, operating, execution, but it's hard, right? And it's like, that you have to actually execute on what founders like Ian, think up, which is super hard to do. So don't, just assume that like, oh, I want to be the CEO, or no, I think you should be the CEO. That's a complicated question.
So I'm actually going to go off of that question now. Now that we've like rolled into another topic, I've always been appreciative of a founder that has the knowledge and has the smarts to know what they're best at and to know where they stand. The founder doesn't need to be a CEO. That's maybe not where they're best suited. It might be, but that's maybe not where they're best suited. So as someone now that is mentoring and investing, What do you look for in founders as far as knowing where their expertise sits?
So all founders say they're willing to step aside as CEO when the time comes. And I would say almost all founders mean it when they say it. And almost all founders don't do it when the time comes. So what I tell them is, if someone ever comes to you and says, hey, you know what? We think maybe it's time for you not to be CEO anymore. What's really happened is for the previous 6 months, your co-founders, your management team, your board members have all been talking behind your back. And they're all saying, geez, when are we going to tell so-and-so it's time to move on, right? And so you have big ears and listen. So if you get a whisper of that, there's a lot of other talk happening. So the classic thing as investors, you want to look for sort of humility and self-awareness. And so in Denise's panel yesterday, where one of her people that approached her says, I'm the next Steve Jobs. It's like, that's not a good thing to say, right? It's like, unless you are, right? And then give them money. But you know, the Elon Musk is, that's extremely rare, right? And so for most people, it's recognizing that your role as a founder is not that of CEO. Like in my CEO talk, I say, how many of you are CEOs in here? And they'll put their hand. I say, well, in 20 minutes, we'll see if you agree, right? It's like, how many of you like attending meetings? How many of you like talking to accountants and lawyers? The hands go down. Who likes building stuff? Hands go up, right? It's like, well, yeah, you like starting things, you like building stuff. That's a great thing to do as a founder. But that's completely different than what a CEO does as like running the business. If you get to be very large, a couple hundred employees or more, then you can hire a COO, which is a person who then would have like VPs report to them and actually run the business. And so you might be a CEO then, which is sort of very external and visionary oriented. Again, Larry Ellison, CEO, and he has two like co-presidents that run the business. But that's a different sort of thing. But having a founder with high self-awareness to be like, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at hiring and budgets and timelines and delivering sprints and things like that.
That's sometimes not their strength, which is a great thing to admit.
I think with SendGrid, Isaac was super happy the first day I started because he's like, whew, I'm out of that job. Amazon had come in to compete with us at a very low price, and it's like, how do you do competitive response? It's like, oh, I know about that. That's fun to me, right? And then I started treating him like a VP of engineering, like, hey, start delivering on schedules and hiring people. And he's like, what? I don't want to do that either, right? So we hired a VP engineering. So if you're a founder of a well-funded company, right, you can really design a role. He ended up doing like VP of R&D, which was a non-accountable job, right? You don't have to meet, production schedules for production product. And then SendGrid Labs, which is kind of a Techstarsy-like thing that he did with Mike Rowan, one of his co-founders from a previous business. They actually kind of ran a little, I don't want to use the I word, incubator. We'll call it an accelerator. An accelerator inside our business, so they could basically, make something new every 90 days, just for fun, and kind of see how that would play in the market. But that's a great way to design roles that fit founder abilities and interests.
So on that note, then, this transition that you had in 2011 with SendGrid. They were about 20 employees at the time-ish. They had graduated from Techstars. They were kind of moving on up. What does that conversation look like when you have these three co-founders and they say, we are ready to not be in that role anymore? On your side, how do you approach someone like that? If you're a founder, how do you approach someone that you're wanting to be the CEO, to take you out of that role? How do you start those conversations, and then how do you kind of execute on that so you can continue to be a co-founder?
So it's oftentimes not the founder who starts those conversations. It's someone else around the founder that starts those conversations. And then likely investors, board members who are involved. And then investors and board members, have a stable of people, right, who have run companies or they've just known them in the ecosystem for a long period of time. And so there are, 5 to 50 people I could think of in and around 80202 here that have sort of run companies and where they are in their sort of founder lifecycle journey. That's like, oh, they're good at scaling a company from 10 to 100 or from 100 to 1,000. Just what's the right kind of person to put in there. So in the SendGrid case, it was the board reaching out to me. I'm not sure which board member it was. It was Brad Feld. So I had left Oracle after being acquired into Oracle, stayed 3.5 years, made a fair amount of money, but not like totally never work again, but didn't have to work for a long time. And so I finally quit, and I was just like hanging around Boulder doing my thing, which is helping connect people, money, and knowledge. And Brad, and I said to Brad, I'm like, everyone's like saying, are you retired? I'm like, well, I'm not really retired, Brad. I'm like 42 years old or something. I'm like, I'm not sure what I should call it. He's like, oh, you're on sabbatical. I've seen a lot of people in your role, right? Take a year, get disconnected from the math software you've been doing. When you want to re-engage, we'll find something fun to do. I said, that sounds great. Sabbatical, cool. So I had about a month of all the coffees and everyone saying, hey, congratulations on leaving Oracle. And then Brad calls and says, hey, forget what I told you. Have I got a deal for you, right? There's this company, it's literally like 5 blocks from my house. It's 25 people, which is sort of my perfect sort of size of company. And we gave them $5 million a year ago, and they haven't spent a nickel of it. And now Amazon's coming in to compete with them, and they need to figure out competitive response, how to deploy $5 million effectively. As you heard earlier, I blew $5 million in a year ineffectively some years before. So I'd had some experience on how to spend $5 million and learned a few things. And I'm just like, look, I am, I just know. I'm training for Leadville Trail 100. It was like the following August. I'm like, how about, we just talk a year from now, right? I'm not interested. And then I talked to a few CEOs around town and said, hey, what do you think about this company? And to a person, I could tell by the look in their eyes, they were a little jealous. I mean, they were CEOs of their own companies. And I said, well, what would you think about being the CEO of SendGrid? And they're like, oh, that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Or that's a once-in-a-decade opportunity or something. I'm like thinking, and I still was like, so I met board members like each month I'd meet one board member. So we kind of started there. And the only thing I was interviewing for was culture. I had created this 4-H system a few years before when I was a CEO called Honest, Hungry, Humble, Happy. And I thought, hey, board members who I work for, I want to make sure that's a 4-H test. And so I kind of interviewed them once a month, one per month. And then it was the holidays, had a nice vacation, and came back. And I was like, hey, I think maybe I will, ready to get involved again. So we'll see if this SendGrid thing has some legs. I'll ping Isaac. Because the board said, hey, follow up with Isaac. And so I pinged Isaac, never heard back from him. I thought, well, he's moved on. I'll just keep training for Leadville and life is good. Well, it turns out that Isaac just isn't really good at following up on email, as it turns out. And don't take it personally if he ever doesn't respond to you, right? He just gets a lot of emails. All these alerts and stuff coming off those systems. But eventually he wrote back and says, hey, let's chat, right? I'm like, okay. And so I talked to Isaac here, obviously good 4-H fit. And then I flew down to California where his co-founders were in Anaheim. And I met with Tim and Jose, and I was like, these guys, don't know much about their business, but certainly they passed the 4-H screen, and then met the management team, and so that was sort of the process.
As you're coming on as a CEO, how are you I'm imagining that the founders and the co-founders had a culture at SendGrid. How are you building, maintaining, changing, adapting? What does that process look like as you're coming on as a CEO? Because you don't want to destroy what they've made. That's what has kind of got this company off the ground a little bit from that standpoint. But you also want it to grow and to scale and maintain those key elements. What does that process look like?
Yeah. So Isaac had a list of like 13 values he'd written down. Can anyone remember a list of 13 things? No. Right, and so it was more an idea of clarifying that culture and naming and branding it so you can scale it and creating it. I'd already done this back in 2003, so it was I had a system for how to interview for 4-H culture, how to reinforce it. We improved that at SendGrid by coming up with a concept called Camp SendGrid. Ken Apple, still at SendGrid, put that together. So when you're onboarding people, it's a very systematic way. Over like your first week on the job and then sort of quarterly thereafter to make sure that you were indoctrinated in the cult of 4-H-ness.
Drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. So I've been accused of that. It's like sort of cultish. I'm like, in a way. But, get the t-shirt. And so it's really about the hiring and then, of course, the firing of employees. That's always a misfire right on your part as a hiring person. He's like, why isn't there a good fit? Perfect time to reflect back and say, well, why do we have to let this person go? How did our interview process miss something? And then you add that back to the hiring process. So really kind of get involved in the whole life cycle of the employee. Weekly all hands meetings are, I think, super important to run a business. And at those meetings, you just talk about 4-H stuff naturally. About something being a first H problem, which is the honest one. You think someone's bending the rules a little too far, you refer to it as a first H problem. Or, someone, this is rare, but it happened, someone overplayed the happy card, right? So honest, hungry, humble, happy. Happy is sort of that Colorado style of doing business. But what I find with millennials, you guys are a tough bunch, right? Very egalitarian. If you're on a team and you have a team goal, whether it's, closing support tickets or hitting sales leads or whatever, and someone on that team is not pulling their weight, you get voted off the island. It's not me firing you. It's not the supervisor firing you. It is your peers. Will be like, hey, this person thinks this is a playground, and they're just having fun with the free beer and all that stuff. It's like, nope, and it's just yeah. So
I think that's maybe the first compliment I've ever heard of millennials.
There's all kinds of good things about millennials. They try new stuff, right? You got to like people that do that.
I appreciate that. As a millennial, I appreciate that. So as you're the CEO of SendGrid and any company where you've come in and you are rebooting or rebuilding this business, how are you?
So pause that for a second. So like when you bring in a CEO, I've been on a number of boards. There was a company, and they're like, hey, we need to change out the CEO from a founder to someone else. Hey, Jim, why don't you do it? I'm like, because I don't want to be a CEO again. But I have strong opinions about how you bring in a CEO. And so I said, I will do a little workshop with the board and the founders and kind of help them think about this process. And my first question was a trick question. I said, do we want the CEO to be a culture fit? And they all said, yes. And I said, no, right? Because we're trying to change the culture, right? So even Isaac's culture, there's 13 things, right? Some we would emphasize, some we de-emphasize. But say you have 4 elements to your culture, A, B, C, D, your current culture. And you're bringing in a CEO. This is a huge deal. I'd call it a refounding moment. So I was not a legal founder of SendGrid. I would say I was a founder of SendGrid in the Reid Hoffman sense, that the business was essentially refounded when you bring in a CEO like me, someone who has their own sort of management approach. And so that all gets sort of dropped on the business. It has to be adapted for the facts on the ground, key point. You don't want to hire someone who just drops in their playbook. When you interview them, you need to ask, like, how are you going to adapt your playbook for the facts on the ground here? And so we did the adaptations, but 90% is like, this is sort of how that business is going to run. So when you look at that culture that's A, B, C, D, and then you bring in a CEO, you want to think about, hey, let's sort of take away the A, B culture, because that might be just a little too casual, a little too fun, and we need to get a little more professional, a little crisper in execution. So let's take C, D, and let's add in E, F. So let's design a process that's a CEO to bring in a C, D, E, F culture, however you define that. Those new dimensions that you want to be like, oh, this is where we're moving towards, which will drive turnover, but that's okay. When I first got clear on 4-H culture way back in 2003, at least a third, if not 40% of the company turned over, including 4 out of 5 sales reps. And board wasn't too happy about that. But it was awesome because it freed up the deck so that the new VP of sales could come in and bring in new people and a fresh start, and away we went.
So there's this element of maintaining some of the culture, but flipping it over. How do you take steps to maintain that original vision and or culture that the co-founders had versus kind of steering in maybe that more professional way, or maybe a direction that just scales a little bit better? How are you making those decisions as a CEO?
Well, I think one of my first things, I'm very founder friendly, because I recognize and honor founders, right? Co-founders number 1, founders number 2. That's super hard. The personal risk that all founders take, specifically SendGrid founders, it was not just like, oh, this was awesome. Even after funding, Isaac had a Christmas with his family, and his kids were like grade school age, where they didn't get any presents because their debit card at Walmart bounced. Right? It's like, and that was that's after he's raised $5 million plus, right? So imagine the chaos that had preceded all of that. So I'm very founder friendly. So when it comes to designing roles and jobs for them that they do well, and those initial values. And I think in SendGrid's case it was very easy because the 4 H's really encompass a lot of different concepts, which were a pretty tight overlay to the 13 things that Isaac had talked about. The first H of honest has a lot to do with trust and transparency, of high delegation. It was all kind of wrapped into that first H. So that one was pretty easy. Where I found it trickier is when you have a more complex situation. As the leader, the CEO, you get to pick the VPs who then pick the employees, and you can actually pick your customers. And you want to fire customers who don't fit your culture, and you pick your suppliers. right? And you pick suppliers that are part of 4-H culture or your own culture, as long as it's consistent. Doesn't matter what it is. Consistency is the key. Oracle is not a 4-H company. It's a 4A company. Aggressive, annoying, arrogant, something else. But Oracle is super successful because they're consistent. And if you're basically a shark swimming with sharks, that works, right? But if you're sort of a nice Midwestern 4-H person swimming with sharks, that can be difficult. But what I didn't mention is like your investors, right? And so if your investors, if your board has a different cultural perspective than you do, again, not different or not bad or good or bad, but just different, then that's very challenging to sort that out. You have to end up, you have to quit or leave, or you've got to get different investors or owners when you sell the business or do a buyout or something on that side. And that's a lot harder.
And that brings me to this idea of a company relaunch or a reboot. How do you know when it's time for that? I mean, it all sounds very like a big chess game, right? Like you founded this company, you've had this idea, maybe you're not the best person to lead it, so you find a CEO, and then at some point you have to go, oh my God, maybe we need to shift gears and change things. How do you make that decision?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. So the first real team I joined was a reboot. So I'd been in this ecosystem for 2 years, again, sort of volunteering full time while having a SFM job. Shit for money, pay the rent, living on 16th and Gaylord, just north of Colfax, $300 a month cash rent, no credit check, right? And I spent a lot of time in the startup ecosystem doing all this stuff. And one night at the Oxford Hotel in the men's room, late at night, I got propositioned to be the CFO of this 4-person company. And this company had raised 300 grand a couple years ago, scaled to 25 people, spent about $1 million more money than it had, which created a lot of trade debt, and brought in Uncle Sam as an unwitting investor on the cap table. Don't do that. Pay your payroll taxes. Payroll tax liability is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. It will stay with you forever. And so it was a real mess. But the product was good, and the customers liked it, and they kept buying it after the business had been shut down. They would literally send checks to a lockbox in Boulder, about 60 grand a month. And so the founder's like, damn, well, I've got this $700,000 liability in this business, but I'm getting $60,000 a month coming in the door now with no employees. Maybe I'll try and restart this thing. And so he got the best sales rep to come back, Saeed Hamid, and he got the best engineer to come back, Eric Wainwright. And he's like, Jim, we need a finance person who's good with spreadsheets, can kind of figure out how to pay off $700,000 with $60,000 and pay the 4 of us some money and try and make this work. And I'm a lawyer, right? And so you need to go down to the Denver City County Courthouse just up the street here and fend off all that litigation that they're trying to crush us with. And I'm like, I didn't like my current job. And so I'm like, and he said, I can only promise you 90 days. And I said, I'm in. So now I'm 28 and I'm a CFO. And that's the business that I ended up becoming the VP of sales of, getting fired from, hired back as CEO, eventually sold it to Oracle and ran the Crystal Ball Global Business Unit as the general manager, and was the vice president for enterprise performance management. Very long title. But yeah, it all worked out in the end. We had to do some very aggressive things along the way. So that was a reboot that sort of forced on us when the business literally just crashed from a financial perspective. With the Web Families business, the reboot was really was killing it and selling it to a customer. And then the customer ran with it in the IT department. That happens a lot. Many of the wins you read about in the paper, as an investor in a lot of the funds, were like, why didn't we get a check on that deal? It's like, oh yeah, because it sold for like a nickel, right? It's like, there's always a backstory to things that you read in the paper. And then with SendGrid, right, the business outgrew me. It's like, I like 10 to 100 people. I always say like 20 to 80 is kind of my zone. But SendGrid grew so fast, we went from 25 to 100 people in a year. It was ultimately 250 people when I left, and Samir took it over and ran it to now 500-ish people and IPO and all that. I think it would have been fun to stay for the IPO, to go to New York and do that, but I would not want to work the day after that. Delivering results for a public company, no, I really enjoy like Denver Startup Week and being around this moment of creation is, I think, where the magic is. And there's a time and place in your journey, and for me it was in my early 30s, no kids. That was the time to be that hardcore founder. Later in life, being the CEO of a venture-backed company, honoring founders, having my own scars on that. It's like, that was a good phase of life. And now I'm in the sort of post-exit phase as a investor, helper, which is really where I started. So when I showed up at 26 years old, lots of education, and I did a few little businesses that didn't work, more or less, but I had something to give, which is my time. And so I was on like a sponsorship committee, and so I would call the lawyers and accountants and say, hey, give us $500 or $5,000 to sponsor events like this. I was on a programs committee, so I could call the VCs and say, hey, look, I'm with this Rockies Venture Club. We're doing a panel on how to raise money in these times. I like to run. I thought that it's just like running a running magazine. It's the same content over and over again, right? It's just year after year, it's the same stuff, right? It's like how to raise your
best running shoes for Christmas.
There you go. How to run your fastest 10K, do your first marathon, right? It's like here's how to what's your co-founder situation like, or should you raise debt or equity, right? It's like what's convertible notes look like, right? Just so it's all the same stuff, but we kind of dress it up. And the VCs are always very helpful, and they'd always say yes to doing a panel, and they'd always say no to doing a sponsorship. So never ask VCs for sponsorship dollars. And now you're on a membership committee, right? So you just call first-time attendees. Oh, you're first-time, DSW, whatever. But I think the key part is when I talk about being involved and like coming to DSW, awesome. What's awesomer is volunteering, right, to help put on these things. What's even more awesome is doing one, right? Is create your own panel. I signed up to give an Ignite talk in December in Boulder, and I had done one some time ago in Boston. And the reason I signed up for it was we've attended a few recently, and I really liked them, and they were fun, but because it scared me a little bit. I'm just like, yeah, you need to do some things that scare you a little bit, instead of showing up and having some wine and enjoying it and going, that's awesome, that was really fun. And it's like, get off the sidelines and sort of back into the ring in that little regard, and it'll be a fun talk.
What's your topic going to be on?
MOS, Marriage Operating System.
I love that.
Denise and I do quarterly offsites, and we run our lives kind of like a business, and people think that's weird. Then we talk about what we do, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds kind of fun. Makes a lot of sense." So
okay,
we'll talk about that.
December, it's going on the calendar. The holiday Ignite Boulder.
Ignite Boulder.
Okay, we'll get it up.
Fun.
We'll get it up on the calendar. I love it. That idea, though, of community and staying involved, getting involved, staying involved, and then propelling the community forward is something that you've mentioned a number of times throughout the talk. What is the value of that through the different stages of your career and the connections that you can make because of it?
So much like being a founder, you become a founder because you can't do anything else. It sort of selects you. I had interviewed for like law jobs in DC doing like tax law, right? And I'm just like, that would have been the death of me. Can you imagine me in my 40s, whatever, in DC doing tax law, right? Like, ugh. And it's just like, so I just opted out of that whole process. I drove out to Boulder, an old Land Cruiser, my little triathlon bike, and I'm like, I'm gonna figure it out from here, right? Just, and I lost my train of thought there, sorry.
Community.
So when I showed up here, it was like, I want to do the multi-sport stuff, and I started doing that for fun, because I needed to have a job. I had this fancy education, and it's like, what am I going to do? And I learned about venture capital in the MBA program. It was my industry paper. It was supply and demand of venture capital. And so I knocked on a few VC doors, and they're like, go away, right? We don't hire associates or principals. We just have partners, and people open the mail. I'm like, I'd open your mail, right? It's like, I'll do anything. But they're like, go away. One of those VCs ended up funding my first company, which is nice. Didn't make him any money, though. But being in the community, it's like, it became like a big part of my life. It wasn't like just part of what I did. It was like who my friends were. I got involved with Rockies Venture Club. Jeff Rudolph was the one person I knew. He was at Coopers and Lybrand in their finance group, because I interviewed with Coopers in Richmond, and they said, well, go talk to Jeff when you get to Denver. But you can't interview on the East Coast for a job in Denver. You got to go to Denver first. And then, so I met him, and he's like, oh, you should go to Rockies. I go to Rockies, and they're like, hey, get involved in all this stuff. And so we'd be on the Government Affairs Committee, another thing, which is we drink beer in Lodo and complain about the government. So some things don't change, especially today. I've not heard how that's all gone. But it was this guy, Eric Weissman, who was on the Government Affairs Committee, he gave me actually 3 huge breaks. That first one was being CFO. The second one was VP of Sales. The fellow Saeed, who was our VP of Sales, had an illness. It affected his brain and how he perceived the world, which was really sad, made him paranoid. And so we had to take him out of that position. And so I became a VP of Sales without ever having carried a bag or a quota or done any selling. But I had hired everybody, and I knew everybody. And as the CFO of a business with no cash, I knew the pipeline backwards and forwards because that was my money coming in. And so I ran that sales team for a year. And I say he fired me. He actually offered me the CEO job when I was the VP of sales. But I told him I couldn't stay for a year because I wanted to start a company. And then he fired me. And then I went down the street and said, hey, guys, I'm in, right? So back to that part of the story.
And then you lost $5 million and yeah.
So, but the community thing, people say, why do you do it? And I think at one level, it's just a hedge, right? I had a 90-day commitment on my current job. And so I'm out there helping a lot of other people, their business. And it's a hedge, right? So that if the thing I'm currently working on goes south, I've got 7 or 8 other things sort of got my fingers into them. It's also good for the ecosystem, right? I view Denver as an island, right? If you get in a car and drive from here, north, south, east, or west, you go a long ways and there isn't much. Apologies to Kansas City, Salt Lake, Calgary, and Albuquerque, right? But it's just like, it isn't. So we're on this island, and I want to stay here. I liked it here, right? I don't want to go back to Iowa, Pennsylvania, Virginia, where I came from, other than to visit. Good place to visit, good place to be from, but I want to stay here. And so having things, if you start a business and you take money from the West Coast and you blow it, you hurt everybody. Because people on the West Coast start saying, oh, Colorado, that's where money goes to die. That's bad for all of us. But if you take money from the West Coast and you create SendGrid, everyone's like, oh, shit, you can get cheap, good companies there. You might have noticed our valuations are lower than on the West Coast, right, for a lot of reasons. But it's like you want to have that rising tide. So that's been a good effect. And probably thirdly, it's just been fun, right? This sense where you meet people, you learn stuff. That's what Denise and I really enjoy doing is we meet with startups, and we just learn so much, right? From really every meeting, we're like, I didn't know where Lohi was. I asked a guy yesterday, he's like, we're in Lohi. I'm like, which one's that, right? I mean, there's so many new neighborhoods around here, I can't keep them all straight. I'm like, oh, that one. So anyway. So it is that learning, which is helpful. And I think Techstars and Brad have done a good job of branding this idea of give first. But I'll tell you, since 1992 when I got here, that culture was already here when I got here. People helped me without a good reason. And that was awesome and helpful. And so it's just very easy then to help other people because of all these reasons. It's fun, it's good for everybody to learn things.
What are some of the actions that people can take in giving back to the community as far as being a founder or CEO, kind of a leader in the company, not just someone that's like opening mail and like volunteers for stuff, but on a larger scale, how can you involve? Well, so everyone has something to give, right? So if you're right out of school and you're like, you have time, right? You have energy to help put on these sorts of events, right? If your company starts to scale, then it's, putting on these panels. There's all kinds of, we've met some interesting people who are new to the community. It's like, put on the panel, like, how do you get integrated in this community, right? What are the tools you would use to do certain things? If you're the CEO of SendGrid, it's like, we're the first sponsors of Galvanize, right? We were the first sponsors of Denver Startup Week when it first started, 9 years ago. Eric Machizik, Bart Larang, friend and neighbor of mine. It's like, Bart sponsored the big night party, whatever, and we put the banners up around Larimer Square, and we're like, because we like helping people who are starting things. And I love Denver Startup Week and whatever year this is. But, I must say my heart's with the years 1, 2, and 3, right? I love Techstars. We still do a lot with them. But, I think back to the those first few years. We do a lot with Merge Lane. It was a women-focused accelerator. They ran 3 years and killed it. And I thought that was pretty cool. It's called creative destruction. Right, you do something for a period of time, and if Merge Lane was on their 8th class, I'd be like, great, let's help support them. But my enthusiasm would be like, man, they're going to do their first Funderator the week after Thanksgiving, and so like Denise and I are really excited. We're going to like oh, it's the first Funderator. What is it? I don't know, but we're in, right? It's like let's go figure it out, right? And so it's you get to be that level of a company, Yeah, we would do scholarships for G School students so that, it was at least then it was $20K, I think, to go through the first program. That's quite a lot of money. So if you can, cover half of that or more for someone, that's awesome. We would hire people out of G School. If you're a big company, certainly for diverse candidates coming out of G School, work with Katie and Find My Flock group, right? And so you'll have large Scrum teams. A Scrum team's about 8 or 9 people. And so you need to have some sort of senior, engineer that knows what they're doing, and you need to have middle engineers, right, that do that kind of work, but you also need junior engineers, right, to do bug squashing and notating or whatever junior engineers do, right? And so bringing those people in out of G School who come from non-traditional backgrounds, perfect way you can contribute to the community when you're running that scale of a business. Again, that's where you should be doing like the sponsoring, because you've got the checkbook, and then once you get acquired by Oracle or something. I was there 3.5 years, and so let's just say Oracle showed up as a customer on almost every startup's deck,
because you could just, come to me at Oracle and say, hey, we're doing this, blah, blah, blah thing. I'm like, great, we're in. I had a budget. I can kick you some money, right? 50K, whatever. And, now you have Oracle as a customer. And then you can take that to the West Coast and be like, oh, we have Oracle as a customer, right? And so I miss not being able to do that. So when you have people like Ryan Sullivan, who is the CEO founder of Parkify, who's now at Dish, some of the board of Yonomi, and so it's like Yonomi. It's like, you want to have a relationship with Dish, just have lunch with Ryan, right? He's from the community, right? He's not a real Dish guy, at least not yet. Just like I felt like even at 3.5 years at Oracle, I wasn't a real Oracle guy. I was still just Jim from Colorado, right? And
with the Land Rover and the triathlon bike,
with all that stuff, right? And so you're having some friendlies at companies like that. So if you end up in that role, you can help out a lot by helping bootstrap up these other companies. By giving them money. I can remember one company we coincidentally signed, actually this was at SendGrid, we signed a consulting agreement with them, which was exactly the amount of money they needed for their bridge financing to get them from where the money ran out to where they thought they could get their Series A done. And they did real work for us, right? But they had a group of really high quality data scientists that were sort of building their own product, but we rented them for a while to try and kickstart a data initiative with SendGrid.
I love it. So we have time for one more question, and then we'll open it up actually to the audience for you guys to ask. Looking back on all of your experiences, is there any advice that you would give to yourself? That's a loaded question. Yeah. So
I think about it. I think about that kind of stuff a lot, actually. So I think that there is a natural time cycle to things, and it's kind of 3 to 4 years. You can think about it like an undergraduate education. Yes, 3 to 4 years, not 7 or 8 like they do in Boulder, right? It's like 3 to 4 years. There were a military deployment, right? You sign up for a tour of duty, understand that's about 3 years, right? And it's like you're going to sign up again for a second tour of duty. And I think that if you're not being forced to move along every 3 to 4 years, you should move yourself along in 3 to 4 years. And I think in 3 to 4 years, you can sort of get your head around something. You can spin some knobs and see if it's made an impact, sort of years 1, 2, 3. And then as much as you think you're the right person to spin knobs and do the next wave of stuff, you probably aren't. And you as a person will grow a lot more if you transplant yourself into some other context. I have a good friend who ran a company here in town, Gold Systems, Terry Gold. His name was on the door, a little hard to leave after 3 years. He stayed for 20. And we talk about this very honestly, and he'd say, well, Jim, the business has changed a lot, and I've grown and I've learned a lot because we did this and this and this. And I'm like, I get all that, right? But I went from math software to online baby photos to a security company, back to the math software company, to email infrastructure, right? And by switching those contexts, in some ways it was very, very different, learning all those different markets and stuff. But in some ways, the management process, that MOS, the management operating system, was all very, very, very similar. I knew exactly what I'd be doing on a Thursday, right? All hands meeting, management meeting, lunch with employees, one-on-ones with VPs, bam, 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 right? It's just, there's a process to it. So I think in hindsight, I spent 10 years collectively at that math software company, and it was like through the 90s. And I'm like, if I would have, had the courage to leave after 3 years saying, this is basically not working. It's working a little, that's your death zone, right? It was growing 25% a year and break even profitable. It's like, oh, we'll get them next year, right? It's just like, okay, 10 years of your life, think of what I could have done with those 2 other deal slots in that time frame. I could have learned a lot more, doing other things, whether it was back then a social media company or Web 2.0 company. Now it's like, blockchain or crypto or something, right? And VR, AR, right? There's these, not you hop from trend to trend, but that, I talked to a lot of students and whatnot, or people in career junctions, and they said, well, geez, should I go left or right? And I'm like, always choose the path of most learning. Right? Don't do what makes your significant other happy, or your parents happy, or the biggest paycheck, right? Or the highest status among your, what you think is your peer group. If I stayed on the East Coast, I couldn't do this, right? Because among the accounting graduates or the law graduates, it's like, are you working for the big law firm? Are you working for the big accounting firm? Do you have a nice car? Do you live in a certain place? It's like by changing context and coming out here, it gave me that freedom to sort of bounce around for a couple of years as I kind of found a footing. And then making it work. So my advice to me is mix it up every 3 or 4 years. Keep it fresh.
Well, thank you so very much. We'll open it up to questions, but to start, we'll just give a big round of applause. Does anybody have a question? Does anybody want to kick it off? Any burning questions? Or are you all so hungry you want to get to lunch? Okay.
So I heard you mention the I word, incubator, and I just
No, we don't use that word.
I just wanted to hear more about that. So.
Well, there was this thing called incubators before there were accelerators. And people who run accelerators say they're not at all like incubators, but the history of incubators is a sad one. It was just didn't work, right? This idea that you would be like in co-working space and you'd have some mentorship around you. So it was a different model than accelerators, and David Cohen and Y Combinator have been very clear about sort of how they're different around. It's much more structured, there's actual funding involved, and it is different. But the similarities also seem pronounced in my mind. And now the first accelerators are from '07. So we're now looking at 11 years of history. SendGrid was the first company, I think, from any accelerator to go public. YC has had a few sell for a big amount, but Techstars has 2,000 companies. So that's just a large sample size to draw from. So I think that I think it's interesting. What happens in a post-accelerator world? If the incubators had their 15-year run, and accelerators are 9 years into or 11 years into whatever their run will be, what's next? What's a better way to help start and grow companies?
What did you find were the key hurdles to implementing the 4 H's first time you tried it on a large level?
Getting sworn at by my board. They thought that having everyone think alike would be bad, and they thought it seemed sort of squishy. And so I told them that it's not squishy. Maybe it is squishy. Give me that one. But it's not that everyone thinks alike, right? You get values consistency, and then the business fights really fly, right? Because if you feel comfortable, and it all gets back to like Patrick Lencioni stuff, 5 Temptations of CEO, 4 Dysfunctions of Team, it gets back to vulnerability. If you're that kind of leader who can never be wrong, we know some leaders like that in government, right? That's bad, right? You want to encourage that sense of, I don't have all the answers. When I first became a CEO, the management said, Jim, where are we going? And I'm like, I don't know. I will make sure we have the right people in the room and we're comfortable talking to each other, and we'll figure it out. And if we don't like where we're going, then we'll go someplace else. But yeah, the board was very unhappy with this idea that everyone would be like all thinking the same, but it's completely different. When you have that sort of honest, hungry, humble, happy framework, then you can really argue like heck about, are we going to do a channel model or a direct model? Direct's better. Denise likes channel. We have our biases. As part of running a company this way is we run these things called movie meetings. You're going to make a big decision about, hey, we're going to change our pricing, right? But you have to show up to the meeting with a take. You have to have an opinion, but an open mind. And in a political organization like an Oracle, that's very tough. Any large organization, I would say, that gets to be very, very difficult. When I was at Oracle, you basically do what your boss wants. When you work for me, I require you to do 2 things. 1, do something I disagree with. And 2, make it a mistake big enough to hit the board packet. So if you're not doing something I disagree with, then you're doing your job the way I would do your job, which means I've not hired well. Because you should do your job better than I do your job, right? Was I a great CFO? Nope. If I were a great CFO, I'd still be a CFO. I was a good CFO. Was I a great VP of sales? Nope. I was a good VP of sales. But I know what a great one looks like, and they do things outside that cone of how I would do things. And so that's a great test. If you don't see your direct reports doing things you wouldn't do, and you have to have that intellectual, honest curiosity to be like, oh, I wouldn't do that. Let's do it, and then we'll see how it works out. And you can't be like, told you so. That's really immature and wrong, right? But you want to be like, I love our CFO at SendGrid. We had Chad Vara. Amazing person. He scaled Rally from like 10 people to 250, and the same thing as SendGrid. And when we decided to go to Mexico, we did this big kickoff trip in Mexico. He's like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Sounds expensive. But we came back, but once we decided like, this is what we're going to go do, he's all in. He's like, let's see how this works. He's just like an intellectually curious person. Let's see how this works. And he comes back and he's like, that was awesome. Totally worth it. Like, and I would have been, and if it didn't work, I'd have been like, that didn't work. That was just, we'll try something else to try and get everyone on the same page. Because we had technical people in California, we had business people in Colorado. First mistake I made was I put pressure into a crack and made a wedge between those two groups. And to kind of pull that back together, we need to meet on neutral territory, you know, have 3 cups of tea, et cetera, to try and bring the company back together so everyone at least once a year knew what the big idea was, how they can impact it, and hopefully measure it every day. That's why people stay involved with the business.
Hey, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for everything you do for the community. I'm a native out here in Colorado, so it means a lot. My question is your thoughts and sentiments on VC versus like angel funding in initial stages, and just your overall thoughts on those two, and picking a route.
One of my favorite topics. So my bias is pro VC, just because my risk profile is actually conservative. So I've enjoyed being part of this ecosystem while having a 401k almost every year. When I got to SendGrid, I assumed there was a 401k. Great question for you to ask employees on their 30th day anniversary. Ask them what was different than you expected. And at SendGrid, I'm like, they don't have a 401k plan. I'm like, one reason I took this job, even though I'd made some money before, I'm like, I just like that, so efficient, right, is doing that match and stuff, right? I'm like, that's the nerd in me. I'm like, and so I told Chad, I'm like, let's put a 401k together. And Chad says, like, well, I don't think the board will like that. I said, that's why we'll tell them after we do it. It's good for the employees, right? I put employees first. Something that would drink beer with and argue about people way back when was if you have $1, do you give it to shareholders as a dividend? Do you give it to customers as a feature or lower price, or do you give it to employees as a bonus or a trip or free beer or something? If you have a marginal resource, where does it go? And for a long time, 10 plus years, I wasn't trying to solve that riddle. And then I figured out the way I solve it is I put employees first. So I give that dollar to the employees do awesome stuff, make customers happy, and eventually shareholders make lots of money. They make millions while employees make thousands, basically. And I get frustrated with people who are on the investor side who don't see it that way, and they want to pinch employees over small stuff is bad. So angels, VCs. VCs, there are a variety of angels, so I'll just leave it at that. Some like to be more involved than others. So you got to be comfortable with what you're signing up for. And I like to say, don't really take money from friends and family. It doesn't validate your business. It complicates your life. In the rare case where I had a co-founder whose brother had sold a company for so much money, he could give us 50 grand, like you or I might spend $100, right? So it didn't affect the relationships. But you don't want to take money from family and friends that affects relationships. Angels have the role, but I think angels I'm sort of negative on because they tend to be high hassle, low dollar, right? You want to have low hassle, high dollar. So a professional investor, like a local angel, or a local VC, Chris Marks at Blue Note would be a great example. So $10 million fund, likes to be the first check-in, 200, 300, 400K, put together 750 easily if you have Chris sort of lead your first chunk. And what's nice about that kind of funding is it's enough to do some damage. You got a professional investor, so you don't get all the sort of craziness of an angel or unprofessional person. And while he'll do some follow-on, but he can't write a $5 million follow-on check. But he's really well networked into people who do the $5 million follow-ons. If you do your job, which is get some traction and start scaling. So that's kind of a nice sweet spot, is doing like local micro VC. Of course, we have some bigger VCs around with Foundry Group, et cetera. And they have some vehicles for getting in a little earlier. And then you have West Coast, just call it coastal VC, whichever coast it happens to be. And I've raised money from Boston, first money to Colorado from Sigma Ventures with Bob DeVoli, first money from Chicago, William Blair Ventures, and first money from Bessemer into Colorado. So you can raise money out of state and bring it here. You just have the right team executing, and the money will flow. If you raise money from those groups, it's very different. The bar is a lot higher. The happy variable gets challenged because to a person, that's not what those people do, right? And we brought a CEO in from the West Coast with one company and Tap Influence, and she didn't stay that long. She ended up moving back to California. She brought a VP of sales with her, Frank, and I remember talking to Frank. He'd been here about 6 months. He's like, I can't hire anybody. No one here knows what a job is. Right? Just saying. And so they moved the company from Boulder to Denver, which is one step, and then they moved it to California. Right? And so there's a huge cultural gap. So if you talk about VC and the coastal thing, and you're going to raise more than $10 million, you are really playing a national game. And so it's much harder to kind of have that 4H, hey, it's just us kind of thing. I think the perfect Colorado company, you raise $5 million, you hire 50 people, you can be in Union Station, Larimer Square, Pearl Street, whatever, and have a nice office, you know everybody, you get to 10 million in revenue, you can sell for $100 million, and you do it in 5 years, everyone's happy. Think of GNIP and Line Rate and companies like that. It's like, that's a fine Colorado deal. If you take West Coast money and you try to sell for $100 million, it's like, that makes no sense. You want to raise $100 million, right? You're targeting companies like Shopify and Atlassian that are worth $14 billion. Even SendGrid, a little, $1.7 billion in Colorado is awesome. But from a West Coast perspective, it's not, it's sort of $4 billion became the new $1 billion about 5 years ago, right? And so getting into that $5 billion range, the only people in the mountain region who have that perspective are in Bozeman. The founders and management team of Right Now sold to Oracle for about $1.6 billion because they fell for the FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They read a competitor's press release. They thought Mark Benioff was coming after them, Salesforce. And so they ran into Oracle's arms, and they thought, okay, with Oracle, we can fight off Benioff. And then 2 years go by, and Benioff had nothing. He head faked them. And they're like, damn, we could have sold for $4 billion if we would have just kept running the business a little longer. But it's extremely rare to be anywhere in the Mountain West and have the perspective that selling for $1 billion is selling cheap. I like to say when I'm meeting with someone one-on-one, like if we're having this conversation in Denver, $1 billion is this mythical figure in the sky. If we're having this conversation in the Bay Area, $1 billion is on the ground. It's table stakes. It's just that level of difference. So we talk about VC money. You got to be prepared to do that. And again, you'll likely not be the CEO. There are people who have taken companies public, and it's just a different thing.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I'm actually from a company out in San Francisco, and it's a work management SaaS called Asana. We're exploring new locations, possibly Denver, as well as inside of the U.S. and out. And I'm basically
Denver people work really, really hard. Please bring your operation here.
You're already kind of reading my mind. I'm trying to essentially make the case for possibly opening an office out here, and just generally, why would you recommend Denver and kind of the greater Denver and Boulder area?
Yeah, so I think Denver's an awesome place to relocate a business. Denise and I met with the founders of Excello from Australia. They were looking to put their worldwide headquarters someplace. They were considering Salt Lake, Austin, and Denver. And so at Galvanize in Boulder, we were meeting him upstairs, and so we just grabbed half a dozen people that were just in the lobby and said, hey, come upstairs, let's go chat with this guy about why is Denver a great place to put your business? And of course, we said nice things about Austin, a little bit of Colorado surrounded by Texas. And we said nice things about Salt Lake, but Salt Lake has its own issues. And we said, Denver, so it's a great time zone, great airport, well-educated people, low cost of living, reasonable transportation infrastructure. I know it's not where we all need it to be, but we've got through the T-Rex project and a few other things, and light rail and train to the airport. And so it's just in a those are all the sort of textbook reasons. I think from a technology company and management perspective is this what I call 4H, or doing business Colorado style. It's a great place to be an integrated human being, right? If you just want to maximize, I want to find the best product marketing manager, they're sitting in the Bay Area, right? They've maximized one dimension. I wouldn't want to be married to that person. I really probably wouldn't want to drink beer with that person, or much less do all the stuff we do around here. But in Colorado, the interview question we ask on the happy question is, what do you do for fun outside of work and family? I asked a law student this last night. She goes, I'm a level 1 Somm, which is a wine nerd. And I said, oh, then you ask, what's your goal, right? For what are you going to do next? That's the hunger question. And she goes, oh, well, this is how my plan to go do this. I'm like, awesome answer to that kind of question. I said, if I would have asked someone in the Bay Area that question, they don't understand the question, first of all. They're like, I work. That's how I define myself. And I have this family over here somewhere that I see, and I try to play with my kids when I'm around, but I'm really on my phone doing stuff. And so there's nothing, this sort of passion. And the key is you get great passion stories. And then as you look across your workforce, you're like, oh, that's our IT director. She's a boxer, right? And my other IT person, she's a semi-pro mountain bike racer. And so she needs to ride during the day so she can train, and she'll keep all the servers running at night. True story. I said, you got to come into the office one day a week, in the daytime, so we can see you, right? Come to Thursday all hands. But if you want to be out on the trails when it's sunny, no problem, and make all the servers run, later in the day, that's fine too. And so that's what I think you'll find a workforce here. There's not work-life balance, but there's not two things to balance. It's all sort of integrated into one thing. But you'll find really interesting people as they chose to come here from someplace else, which I think makes this unique. I think there's a native here. Wow, that's amazing. But most people have chosen to come here, and it makes us a little quirky and open to new things. And it's easy to get integrated into the society. So we've had actually 3 Australian companies, Simpro, Section, and Excello, all relocate to Colorado, and it's easy to get to meet people. I thought about moving to Boston when I left Virginia, but I felt like, if our grandparents didn't go to the same prep school, we can't really be friends. It's like, well, what's that? That's dumb. When in Colorado, they're all from someplace else, it's easy to make new friends and find social circles, whether it's your kids or spouse or whatever.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. I mean, I totally agree. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys all so much for coming, making time, taking time out of your day, participating in Denver Startup Week, giving back to the community in some sort of way. Thank you for everybody for tuning in on YouTube. Thanks so much. There is lunch outside. Go ahead and check it out. And then Alice Loy is here signing books about the creative economy entrepreneurs, and she's the co-founder of a leading global accelerator for creative tech entrepreneurs. And then we also have Jack Bonneau. He is a 12-year-old entrepreneur who takes lemonade stands and marketplaces and teaches other kids how to be entrepreneurs. So go check him out too. And Jim actually will be interviewing him later today for Galvanize TV. Thank you so much. Yeah.